I think Southgate has his handful of favourites. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of managers that go through life and have their handful of favourites, but is it fair to have a handful of favourites when you're an England manager?
Here we go, at the top of the class on a roll, and it's time to run it up, yeah you know. Maxed out, put the pedal to the floor, ayy, on a roll, here we go, here we go.
So for episode 2, it's international break. And I think for me, just a lot of questions have been going online, talking about a few things in regards to an England call-up. And one question I have personally is, what does a player have to do to get called up to the England squad? Now, for me, there are some players in the England squad right now which I think a majority of people in football would disagree should be there. I think there's people that should be there. And I think there's so many different angles that you can take, so many different things you can have. I even put a poll on my Instagram today, just in regards to, for me, the question is does a player get judged on form, or does a player get judged on how they've played for England? I think that's the two things that you got to break down when it comes to picking a player to represent the country. And one thing that I need to make clear for me when going into this is that I feel like, especially being in an academy of West Ham, especially being somebody who's aspired to be a footballer and wanting to be in that position where, representing your country is important. You always be told, performances, consistency, work hard. But I've noticed that for me, sometimes it doesn't really work that way. Doesn't really have that same effect, if you ask me. Because, as I said, some players seem to be chosen of form, but there's obviously players who get chosen for what they've done for England in the past or things like that. And I kind of just want to start off with a clip, because I feel like for me, the clip will make everything a little bit clearer with some of the things I say. Because at first I had an opinion. I'm not gonna lie, I did have an opinion. After watching this video, my opinion not shifted, but somewhat went to kind of understand a bit more about the situation. So I just want to play the clip. Once I play the clip, we'll get into exactly how I feel about it.
Not necessarily, because that's what managers come in and be able to get what they need to get for tournament football. And that's what it is. It is not the duration of a season. So when a manager comes in and says, well, you know what? I know when there's pressure, and he's done it before. That's what managers come. You can't turn around and say, oh yeah, boom, it's because he's been crap for the whole season off of people's. A manager comes in and says, listen, I know what to get out of you.
So I kind of started off with this clip earlier in this podcast, not like I did with episode 1, because I feel like with what I'm about to get into, what I'm about to say, and really express in certain ways, I feel like this clip from Adebayo Akinfenwa kind of just broke down quite a few things. And he's got some good points, but he's also got some things that I kind of want to combat and kind of come against, because like I said to you, growing up as a footballer, being in a position of being in academies, wanting to make it, you had this aspiration of wanting to play for England. Now you have players who turn up in the Premier League week in, week out, or turn up in whatever club they represent in week in, week out, consistent at a high level over and over and over again, that you could say somewhat get overlooked. You can also then say there are players who do the same thing, consistently perform, and then they get picked. But then you have those players that have been trash, have played trash, consistently throughout a season have been trash, but yet somewhat they are still there. So now when you sit and look, Adebayo Akinfenwa basically turned around and he said, this is tournament football. Tournament football. So I get what he means in that. I want to get to that part later in this video, but I want to start off with form, because as I said, for me, if you're a player performing week in, week out, you have this, you must be pissed, or you must be vexed, or you must feel a type of way. Lord knows I would. If I know I'm putting in numbers, and I know I'm putting in performances, and this is where I've got a question, does stats really tell the whole story? But, we'll get into that another day. But like I said to you, players are sitting here putting in performances after performances after performances, but tend to be looked over. You have the fullback situation. You also have positions in midfield, which is a situation. You also have a situation with wingers. You also have a potential situation with a striker. I'm not going to sit here and say Harry Kane don't deserve a lot or this or that. But there is questions that need to be asked. Now, the reason why I want to ask these questions is because this makes me, especially from a footballer's standpoint. Remember, I'm doing this podcast to give a view from an athlete's mindset, an athlete's standpoint. Like I said, you've always been told that you have to put performances, be consistent, do this, do that, and that's how you get rewarded for these things. But then you have certain players who potentially, like I said to you, performing week in, week out, who don't get picked or get overlooked. For example, look, I used to be told this same thing, and this line got told to me a while ago. And the line was basically, there's a manager for a player and a player for a manager. And I never really understood that until my adult life, or until the point where I started to develop a bit more maturity when it comes to football. When people say there's a manager for a player and a player for a manager, I think Southgate has his handful of favourites. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of managers that go through life and have their handful of favourites, but is it fair to have a handful of favourites when you're an England manager? Because the whole point of being an England manager is to play the best players who are performing at that moment, to be able to obviously, enter these tournaments, win trophies, and, represent the country the best way possible. When we look at the centre-back situation, and look, I don't want to be that type of person who trash talks players or says anything about players. I'm just going to say it for how it is and how I would feel if I was a potential person. So let's start off with the defensive area when it comes to England. And I think we can all say that Maguire has had a shocking season, and not just a shocking season, I think he's had a shocking time within football. Now, yes, form is temporary and class is permanent, but some people will say, is there class there when it comes to Harry Maguire? Yes, does he do it for England? Yes, he has put in some decent performances, but when we look at it on the overall, I sit and I go, does Maguire deserve to be called up to the England squad? Like, does he deserve it? Like I said to you, are we going off of form here? Because if we are going off of form, he doesn't deserve to be there. There are other centre backs for me that deserve to be there. Now, I know the question can be, what are England's other choices? And for me, that's for the audience side, for you to say what you have to say. You guys can tell me who you think deserves to be above Harry Maguire. However, I just think for me, we need to question the selection. And I think a lot of people are questioning this selection. And I just wanted to have this conversation because I kind of wanted to give my view on it. And for me, I think England players should be selected off form. Again, we go on to the fullback situation. And yes, Luke Shaw does put in some decent performances for England. I'm not going to say he doesn't. However, club form, did he deserve to be picked? Are there better fullbacks out there that deserve to be picked? Now, there was another conversation on that same show that I just showed with Adebayo Akinfenwa, and they turned around and they said, for me, there needs to be a balance on the pitch, left-footed left back. For me, I'm sorry, I believe in balance, don't get me wrong. However, I also believe in form and I believe in performance. And I think if you are consistent week in, week out, whether you are left-footed or right-footed, and you are capable of playing a full-back position, whether you are a right-back naturally, I promise you, you can play as a left-back too. And I think for me, there's a lot of right-back situation. There's a right-back situation, a lot of problems with so many players being contested for that position. I also feel like those right-backs can go left-back and be just as good over there as well. I mean, we saw Trippier play there before. I also think Reece James can potentially do a great job there as well. So I think there's players that we can look at in those positions and say, okay, cool. There's a left back position open, and a potential natural right back should be able to take that position. Again, this is football understanding, this is game understanding, and at this level, you must be mentally understanding of the game. Your mental understanding of the tactical positions of the way that position's played is literally the same as if you was a right back. And I think at that level, a right back should be able to slot into that position. So again, are we doing this off form? Because if we are, for me, Maguire doesn't make it. Luke Shaw doesn't make it. That's off of form. We go into midfield situations, and yes, there are there's a lot of contest within that. But for me, if we go off of form, Conor Gallagher deserves to be there. So yes, he's got his selection and got his called up, but I would love to see how it plays out because, as I said, there's a manager for a player and a player for a manager, and I personally feel that there are midfielders within the England setup that Gareth Southgate has his personal preference to. The question is that fair? Is that something that you as an aspiring young player coming up in a game, wanting to represent your country, does that send off the right signs? Does it send off the right signs that you can be you can put in the performances of your life and be able to be called up to the England squad? You know, Declan Rice, does he deserve to go? Jordan Henderson, all these players that we can talk about off of form, they deserve to be there. But there are also other players that don't. We go into the winger's position. There are players on form that deserve to be there, and there's players that are not. We go into the striker option, and this is another one that I find quite funny because, and this is where it's going to segue me into where I slightly sort of agree with what Akinfenwa said. Don't get me wrong, for me, personal preference, I go for form. However, when you go to the striker option, can we be honest, and let's just be real about it? Let's just be totally honest. For me, first of all, I think it's disrespectful to say a number 2 to Harry Kane. But for me, yes, he's injured, and things happen for him to be withdrew from the squad originally. But Tammy Abraham, 20 plus goals, all competitions. Is it fair to class him as number 2 when, yes, Harry Kane has been putting in some solid performances recently, but in the beginning of the season they weren't there, but he was still getting picked. This is where I gotta ask: is it on form or is it on how you have played for England? Now, Adebayo Akinfenwa said managers know how to get the best out of certain players, and yes, certain players can play better under certain managers. And if we look at England's squad, does Luke Shaw play better for England? Yes. Does Harry Maguire play better for England? Yes. But my question is do you deserve to be called up within that manner? Again, this is England. This is supposed to be the best players of the players within that moment. When you look at other nationals who have dominated, you look at Spain. And for me, I'm going to take Spain because I think Spain's the pinnacle of what I'm talking about when it comes to form or how you've played for the country. When you look at the Spain squad, 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, around those times, you had the midfield three of Busquets, Xavi, Iniesta. David Silva will be in there now and again. Those players were chosen not just because of the stature of who they were. They actually performed for their clubs week in, week out. They put in the consistency. So for me, they're there. You know, who could you have taken them out for? It's hard to say because, like I said, they put in the performances consistently. So yes, I understand that, you know, every manager has a certain skill and a certain mentality to be able to get the best out of certain players. However, this is being able to be picked up on the England squad. And when you look at the future England, the future generation of England and players like that, is this really something that, you know, you're going to get the best out of your players for? Are they really going to sit there they're sitting there putting in performances after performances after performances, but yet, you know, players are being overlooked? Does that send the right message to the next generation coming forward? Does that show that there are chances to be able to break into the England squad? Like I said, I'm all about winning. Now, I'm saying, for me, if I'm manager, I'm bringing the best squad possible. And for me, the best squad is taking a player who's had an amazing season, or if not just one season, 2 seasons, and be able to say, okay, cool, you deserve to go based off your performance because I can tell that this is what you do, this is what you give, and it's going to be influential to the squad. You know? But where I also somewhat agree with what Akinfenwa said is that it's tournament football, and I do believe that tournament football is different to playing a friendly, playing a qualifier, or whatever. Tournament football is different. When you set foot in a tournament, I think there are many things a manager talks about or thinks about when it comes to your player selection. You need to have a variety. You don't want this. You don't want similar players in similar positions due to the fact of what if a game requires something different. You know. Again, it's just one of those things for me where I look and I go, okay, cool. Form or how they've played. For me, how they've played can contribute. And when I look at Harry Kane and I look at how I look at I look at England's selection of strikers and I look at the striking options, and if we are being totally honest, and this is no disrespect to a lot of other strikers out there, Is there a striker better than Harry Kane right now? I think if for England, the answer's probably not. The answer's going to be no. And I think a lot of people would agree with that and a lot of people would say no. But when it comes to Tammy Abraham with 20 plus goals in a season, for me, I would be annoyed if he doesn't make that plane. I'm not going to lie. I'll be annoyed. If we're talking about a backup for Harry Kane, and I hate using these terms because I don't think anybody should be a backup for anybody, but for me, Tammy Abraham brings something different, especially if we're going off of form again, deserves to make it. For me, there's Manchester United fans out there that will question Harry Maguire themselves. And these are the Manchester United fans themselves. You know, I had a conversation with my friend earlier who's a Manchester United fan, and he just can't believe how this guy is in the England squad. So for me, man, I just feel like, is this England squad selection fair? Can England go all the way? If they are going to go all the way, do they go on players who are off of form? Do they go off players of how they've played? Do they, you know, like, is Southgate right to have his little crop of who he thinks? Or are we sitting here saying, nah, England's based off of form? And like I said, I did a poll on my Instagram story, and the votes were literally 90-something% in favour of form. I think people are screaming out for players who have been at the top of their game. Let's take the goalkeeping position, for example. Everton doing absolutely, trash right now in the league. Pickford is England's number one right now. Is there a question to say Nick Pope doing amazing for Burnley? Is there a question where Ramsdale, for me, look, numbers don't lie, but again, numbers also don't tell the whole story. But when you look at Ramsdale in terms of, okay, Jordan Pickford, distribution, can Ramsdale do it? Yes, we've seen it. Shot stopping, we've seen it. Commanding, we've seen it. Leader, we've seen it. And Ramsdale's young. And for me, if we are going off of a keeper who I would want in goal, I want somebody who's on form. That's who I would want. So for me, it's again, England's number one position. Who do you choose? For me, Ramsdale. Obviously, he didn't make the squad for certain reasons, which is understandable. But I'm saying once fully fit and once in a position to be chosen, he can't be denied. Nick Pope can't be denied. I think for me, like I said, this whole England squad selection is confusing. It's a weird one, and I think it needs to be addressed. And I would love to hear opinions on it. For me, like I said to you, from a player perspective, I think it doesn't show the right message to a player coming forward thinking I can get into that England squad. It makes me feel like favouritism, politics. And let's be real, if you've ever been in an academy before, if you've ever been around those things and grew up in the situations that I have for West Ham United or other players for other academies, politics plays a massive play in football, like a massive one. Whether people want to think it or not, until you're in it, like you don't understand and you don't get what politics really happen behind closed doors. And is this one of those situations again?
Here we go, at the top of the class on a